In this video, we're literally going to be breaking down popular YouTubers' thumbnails and recreating them from the ground up. This way you can learn exactly why they made the design choices that they did and how you can actually apply them to your next thumbnail to immediately stand out amongst the rest. Let's start off with our first creator, and that's Lila. Lila covers several things from video editing and filmmaking tips and tutorials to camera reviews and also doing personal vlogs. She understandably has quite a few different thumbnail designs on her channel. Most notably, her camera review ones stick out to me the most. Super clean and minimal, with the product being the focus of the thumbnail. So let's figure out exactly what we need to recreate this thumbnail. Step one, we need to pick the product as well as create the idea. In this case, of course, we're going to be using a camera, but if you're just following along, any product will work just fine. The big thing to keep in mind when planning your shots is that the star of the show is obviously the product that you're reviewing. That's exactly what the brilliance of this thumbnail is. Lila's still in the background holding the camera, still visible but completely blurred out. So this allows the camera to fully dominate the thumbnail image. Also, what's one other thing that you notice? Absolutely no text. Now, of course, if you feel like you want to add some text into your thumbnails, this is not a bad idea because it can typically sometimes add some more impact to the thumbnail. However, if it just makes the thumbnail busy, you'd be better off just to remove that and not have it in the image at all. Step two, we need a background. She used a super dark room in her house, and you can see some of the details on the side of her thumbnail. For me personally, I have nothing close to this in my current setup, so I'm going to actually have to get a little creative with it. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be using a green screen, and I'm going to actually add the darker background in when I go to edit the thumbnail. Green screens are definitely not a bad option, and I particularly use them all the time when I'm making my YouTube thumbnails. However, if you can use a solid background, it makes a much bigger difference when you're actually going into your editing software. Step number three, we need lighting. So the key thing to keep in mind that Lila did with this particular thumbnail is that she only really used one major light. And this particular light is focused dead on the product, and she might have a couple of extra lights that are really low to light her up a little bit, but overall the main light is on the product. So for me, what I'm gonna have to do is I have to have one light lighting up the green screen, and I'm gonna be standing just in front of that, and then I'm gonna have the main light lighting the camera so that way it stands out a little bit more. Step four, if you're like me and you only have one camera, you're gonna have to use your phone to capture this image, so this should be a lot of fun. Now, when you're using your phone, you don't want to use your front-facing camera because the quality of that camera is pretty low. So unfortunately, you're gonna have to flip this around and do this completely blind. Alright, so getting this picture was a lot more challenging than I thought. Not being able to see yourself, especially with as complex of a picture as this is, really sucks. So the couple of issues I had was I decided to use the portrait mode of the iPhone since I was already using it in that direction anyway, and I just could not get the distance correct. So for lack of a better term, I just had to do a ton of trial and error, and yes, it got pretty ugly. So I had two main problems when I was trying to take the shot, is that I was trying to line myself up and I just could not get myself in the frame right. And then when I finally got myself in the frame right, it started autofocusing automatically on my face. So after about 50 or 60 different photos, I finally got one that was actually gonna work. Yes, I understand that my face looks absolutely horrendous, but really in the end, when we actually go through all the editing steps, you're gonna realize it's not that big of a deal. All right, so now on the editing side is where the magic's gonna happen. The editing software I'm gonna be using is Affinity Photo, and if you have some other software, a lot of the same principles are still going to apply. If you use the green screen like I did, you're gonna go ahead and crop yourself out of the background. If you're using Affinity Photo like I am, I strongly suggest that you learn how to use the refine tool. In a basic sense, what the refine tool does is it cleans up a lot of the things you miss when you're masking yourself out of the image. Just to be brief, when you're done masking your image, you're gonna go ahead and go to the top and press the refine button and start painting around your image. Once you're done with the refine tool, I also suggest that you add something called an HSL shift. The reason why the HSL shift is so great is that if I still have some green like on my shoulders or in my hair, what I can do is change the saturation on the green color to make it blend in with the image. How you find the HSL shift is right underneath this adjustments button. Once you get to it, what you're gonna do is select the green option, and then you're gonna go down and drag the saturation slider all the way down to 0. Let's go ahead and drag our image over to our 1280 by 720 thumbnail template. For now, what I'm going to do is just add a black square to the back of the image. The first thing that we want to do is make sure that the camera is even more of a priority focus in the image. So what we're going to be doing is adding a depth of field blur. I'm confident whatever editing software you're using actually has something very similar to this. So the depth of field blur is located right underneath the live filter option. So when you actually select it, you're going to see this. The cool thing about this circle is that you can manipulate it into whatever shapes that you want. So the main thing you want to keep in mind is that you want the center circle to stay within the center of whatever you're trying to focus on. Once you get the circle around the image like you want, you're going to start increasing the radius. This is going to start blurring everything around it. The next thing we want to add is something called curves. What this is going to do is give you some flexibility with the coloring in your image. In this case, what I want to do is darken some of the shadows while also increasing some of the brightness in the areas that we want. So to access the curve section, what you're going to do is go under that same adjustments thing and select curve. So what I typically like to do to darken up some of the shadows is I like to start toward the bottom part, and I drag that out to the right just a little bit, and then I'll go toward the middle and start dragging that back to the left, and that'll enhance some of the brighter parts of the image. So all that's left for us to do is to pick a background for our image to be able to make things pop a little bit more. So what I'm going to do in this case is keep it super simple. I'm going to add some geometry to the background, and then what I'm going to do is take that black square that's already there, and I'm just going to drop the opacity down so that way the background is a little bit darker as well. The last thing I want to do to finish out the background is I want to go ahead and blur it out so it matches the blur that's on my face. And here you go. Here's the final results for our thumbnail. It's not exactly the same, but you get the idea of what we're trying to do when we're making product focused YouTube thumbnails. Pestily is up next. Pestily is one of the fastest growing gaming YouTube channels right now on YouTube. He has definitely become the face of the Escape from Tarkov scene more specifically. He's made a pretty dramatic shift in all his thumbnail designs. More specifically, I'm looking at this one right here. If you've never watched anything related to Escape from Tarkov, your first question is, what the heck does this even mean? Does he actually play with his son? Does he actually physically carry his son? Why is he so mad? That's the first thing to understand about the design choice behind this thumbnail, is that it adds a lot of curiosity as to what's gonna happen in the video. The majority of this thumbnail is gonna be made within the editing software, so all we really need is just a profile picture. Setup is pretty simple. I did a 2-light setup, which I was able to use my camera again, which was a relief. Man, I really need a second camera. Now for this one, I wanted my meanest look, but once again, it was a struggle because I'm not typically a mean looking person. Also, to match Pestily, I had to ditch my hat, and this is when I realized I was having a pretty bad hair day. See, this is exactly why I wear hats all the time. So on the editing side, we're going to repeat a lot of the same things that we did for the other thumbnail. We're going to remove the background, refine the image a little bit, add the HSL shift to knock out some of the extra green. So once we got our image ready to go, there's 2 things we need to keep in mind for this thumbnail. The big thing about gaming thumbnails is that they're always pretty much bright and vibrant. The other thing to keep in mind is that it's super simple. The text is super simple and not a lot of flair to it, and also the image itself is also very simple. So before we mess around with the background, the main thing we're going to have to get first is we're going to need to get our backpack, as well as we're going to need to get our son. Man, this is gonna get weird fast. So I thought it would be pretty easy to find a Tarkov backpack and just add it into the image, but nope, this took forever. I even tried to go on game and make this work, but it just didn't work. Finally, I found 2 backpacks, one for the straps as well as one that will be the actual full bag. The first bag I identified as the one that I wanted to use for the straps that are gonna go over my shoulders. So what I did was I cropped out one of the straps. Once I was done with that, I ended up copying it over to my image and just created an additional copy and just flipped it horizontally. So for the other bag, it was a lot of the same things, except I just cropped out the full backpack and just positioned it right behind me. So after another considerably long time of trying to find some person that will go into my bag, I ended up finding one and just adding it to my bag in the image. Man, this is so weird. Why does this sound weird? Next was the background, and of course this took me once again a while to find a decent cinematic background. Once I found it, I ended up adding it to the back and putting about a 6-pixel blur on it to match what Pestily did. I then added a square over the top, and just to keep it simple, I added just a simple linear gradient with 3 different color options. Because I wanted to get as close as possible to the same colors that he did in the thumbnail, I ended up using the picker option to grab the color options off of the thumbnail. The next thing I did is I went through all 3 gradients and dropped the opacity slightly. My rule with gradient on thumbnails is that the bottom or the outer part of the gradient line is supposed to have the least amount of opacity to just make it pop a little bit more. And then the top of the inner part of the gradient is kind of have the least amount of opacity, so that way it can actually be more see-through. Next is the text. I figured out that they used the Bumblebee 1 font for the main text and Comic Sans for the additional text. They also did something I do with a lot of my thumbnails. I type out the text, and typically whichever one is larger, I make the opposite one a little bit bigger to match. For the finishing touches, I did add the curves to my image to make myself a little bit lighter as well as a little bit darker in some places. I also added a new thing called a high pass filter, which adds a little bit more details to my face. If you want to access the high pass filter, you go into the live effects section and you can access it from there. Once you have it selected, you know you did it right because the image should be completely grayed out, and as you drag the slider forward, you should start to see a little bit more details pop in. When you see something that looks a little bit like this, what you want to do is switch it to an overlay, and then boom, there you go. I also added shadows to the text as well as to the main image of the thumbnail. And there you go. 2 moody Tarkov dads with their children all about to go on an adventure. If you found this video helpful, you'll find my other videos on thumbnails equally as helpful as well. Anyways guys, thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.